On Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. So the first Swampert moveset I'm going to be showing off is my classic Swampert. It's not the best moveset, but it really shows the cool things that Swampert can get up to. It has access to both Counter and Mirror Coat, and as a Water Ground Pokemon, it only has one weakness. 4x weak to grass, so stay away from leaves. Outside of that, you pretty much survive anything, especially with a 100 hit points, 90 defense, 90 special defense, fully defensive invested tank. And the cool thing about Counter is that it doubles the damage that you receive. But most sweeping Pokemon are not going to have 100 base hit points, let alone invested 100 base hit points. So you can take 40% and then KO an enemy with Counter Mirror Coat. Other things happen. Citrus Berry just gives you more effectiveness and more potential to just return hits. The ideal scenario is that you just go 2 for 1. You eat a hit, counter, eat a hit, or eat a hit, Citrus Berry, counter, eat a hit, Mirror Coat, eat a hit, finally get KO'd. But hey, you were able to do some pretty cool stuff and just completely shut down the opponent's momentum. And then the rest of the moveset is just coverage. Earthquake, really good. Avalanche, in theory, kind of makes sense, but also doesn't, because if you know you're eating a hit, then you just counter instead, and it's probably going to be more damage than a super avalanche. For the 4 times avalanche, that's also where it gets weird, because, okay, we're going up against a Dragonite or a Salamence that's trying to set up, so hitting them with an avalanche becomes 4x, but we don't get the doubled power off of taking the damage first because they're setting up, but at least it's something to do against them, especially as like flying type Pokemon, for bonus damage, and if counter is like too risky, because I go counter, they go Dragon Dance. Oh no, game is spooky now. If I keep on countering and they keep on Dragon Dancing, eventually I get one shot, and then the counter doesn't matter. The ability, we have no water type moves, so I mean like Damp, if you can get a hold of it. No one's really running Explosion shenanigans, so like the ability just doesn't exist on the Swampert, which is a shame. Other than that, there's also some weird things we can look into, because what if we go for a relaxed nature, and then we go Ice Beam, not relying on the Avalanche? We're going to have to take a look at those damage calculations, but this is why Pokemon is beautiful, because it's such a weird game when you get into the numbers. That, on the surface, Ice Beam is just going to be 50% more damage than the Avalanche if we're not getting the boosted Avalanche, and we're going from 206 to 256. So Ice Beam is just straight up more damage if you're just throwing it onto a Pokemon trying to stop their setup, and those are going to be the most common Pokemon to stop setup on. But what about Gyarados? Good question. Now, the EV spread on Swampert might look a little weird to you, but there's an idea here, because you're going to be facing physical hits more often than special hits, or like overall the damage skew is more physical, but technically you don't want to block too much physical damage. That way your counter has the best chance of one-hit KOing the opponent, but you still want to be tanky, so it's kind of like hanging in the balance. And I just like this, because instead of just going like full special defense and then maybe making yourself too vulnerable defensively, you know, this is an easy breakpoint. Use 20 vitamins, done. Here's how you want to do it. You want to max out the hit points, use 20 vitamins on the special defense, and then you just pour 6 in defense, and you're done. Easy EV training legitimately inside of your game. And yeah, that's going to be it. It's a fun set. Makes Swampert a bit unpredictable. Like I said, it's not the best moveset, but still like pretty cool if it works and when it works. However, I feel like the most common Swampert set is going to be something like this, because it's filthy, it's annoying. So we talked about how difficult it is to KO Swampert, and one thing I've noticed in Brilliant Diamond Shine Pearl is it seems like not a lot of people are running offensive grass. So you can just kind of get away with it. And Yawn is filthy. If you play the Yawn properly and you force switches or double Yawn, or they commit and then they just stay in and fall asleep, and you find a way of capitalizing on that, it's just really strong. After that, we have Roar and Stealth Rock. So here's my philosophy on Stealth Rock. It sucks. It's bad. Don't use it. All you're doing is giving your opponent a free turn of setup. If you're just going in like, well, the damage calculations say that this turns into one-hit KO after the Stealth Rock's activation, but that also means that you're not in a neutral game state. Neutral game states are the best way of factoring like damage calculations and where to go for strategy and stuff. If you're already assuming a Stealth Rock, so that means you gave up advantage to set up the Stealth Rock, and usually that can be a losing advantage. You lead Ferrothorn, Stealth Rock happens, and then the multi-scale Dragonite goes and sets up a Dragon Dance, Fire Punches you, and the game's over. Or, you know, anything can happen after that. Unless, so Stealth Rock sucks, unless Roar is involved. And this is like I wouldn't say a new thing, but phasing only gets more and more common. Back in the original Generation 4, I barely saw any like Whirlwind Skarmories or something because people didn't like the idea of having a taunt bait 4 status Pokemon. Now, that's pretty common. And the idea behind Skarmbliss is that you aren't forcing switches. You're making your opponent switch because they can't break the Skarmory, and then they can't break the Blissey, and then after you heal and stuff, and leftovers and all the other madness inside the game, like, they're just always damage negative, especially after a Stealth Rocks and Spikes or something. But if you give up that setup, and you don't have a way of cleansing that setup, so also Haze works with Roar, or Haze works with Stealth Rock, stuff like that. If you can't cleanse the setup, then you're just losing. So if you're splashing in Stealth Rocks thinking you're cool, you actually suck at the game. But if you pair with Roar, now you're actually accomplishing something with it, and I hate that it's becoming more common, not just because I'm a setup tank player, but also just because it's a bad strategy unless you have to do this. But then people don't like doing that because you have a Pokemon that's now missing 2 move slots. If you go up against Hyper Offense, you just lose. And now we're not even talking about Swampert, we're just talking about the strange progression of the metagame throughout the history of Pokemon, which kind of folds back into 1 or 2 moves you might incorporate onto the Swampert. But the weird thing for me is that, yeah, phasing, like I said, it's gotten more and more common, but it was still fairly uncommon until, like, Season 3 of the Pokemon Sword and Shield Battle Stadium, where people just were, like, winning so hard with setup in the early days of Pokemon Sword and Shield that in 3v3 singles, people were bringing 2 anti-setup Pokemon. Like, there'd be Trick Scarf, there'd be Roar, there would be Haze, there would also just be taunts everywhere. So, I mean, like, that's a thing. And now the meta is a complete mess because people are terrified of everything. And, you know, Roar is just a really good catch-all that no matter what they're doing, if you can, like, predict the Roar on their setup turn, that's really good. If it's a tank setup to become unkillable, they're not going to be able to damage your Swampert and be threatening enough so you can just roar that away. It's really about just reacting to it. The second the opponent threatens a setup Pokemon, you go into your Roar, and then you just try to get momentum that way, and you just cannot let them take off. Like, people, they used to be arrogant. They used to be like, yeah, I can beat out this stockpile Belly Jump Snorlax. Oh, I can't. Oh, I lose. Now everyone knows. The secret's out. So that means Roar is in, and Stealth Rocks pairs really nicely with that. And the last move can be anything. Scald is an idea. The thing is, if like you burn your opponent, the yawn doesn't work. However, sometimes having a burned physical attacker that's threatening setup is more important than it maybe switching out because it's a little sleepy or something like that. Like I said, people don't like the 4 status Pokemon because they're taunt bait. And Taunt is common, but it seems like Taunt is becoming less common for Haze and Roar, and that's why the meta is a mess. But if you do something like this, it just gives you the complete autonomy over your opponent. Yawn, protect. If they don't switch, then they're just asleep. And if they do switch, you just go if you get super galaxy brain into their mind, just set up that vacation home rent free, dude. You just go double yawn, and now like something's eventually falling asleep, and you don't want to keep switching out every time you get drowsy because Stealth Rocks will chip you away. If something happens, Stealth Rocks take a hit, or maybe Bright Powder bails you out of something. Yawn, take a hit, doesn't matter because like you're super giga tanky, and then you just go protect, they're asleep, roar, yawn, double yawn because they're switching, protect, and like if there's just a scenario where if you're just better than them, they lose like half of an effective Pokemon's health off of the Stealth Rocks, maybe even more, and then 2 of them are asleep. You get that much momentum in a Pokemon game, and it's pretty much impossible for the opposing Pokemon to come back from. Once Swampert does go down, you have to be aware that like your Roar Pokemon is gone, unless you're running triple anti setup, because that's just the meta now. And you kind of have to be aware that the opponent can still gain against you without this cheese, but if you use it properly, yeah, it's just over for them. After that, Banded Swampert. Banded Swampert, to be respected. You know why? It's more damage than Garchomp. Wait, nothing's more damage than Garchomp. Garchomp's in a weird place because it only has 130 attack. But only isn't the right word because this thing will neutrally one-shot you on an Outrage, and my goodness, even a Scarf Earthquake hits like a truck. But Swampert doesn't need to care about speed. Swampert's tanky enough to eat that hit, so 178 attack versus a 182. An Adamant Swampert is the same damage as a Jolly Garchomp. That doesn't sound right, but that's how math works inside of Pokemon. And if you're banded, that's just 50% more damage. And if you're torrented, then you're just destroying everything. Now, the band does kind of leave up some vulnerabilities where it's like, yeah, I get locked into the wrong move, but if you use the right move, you just win, and then you can splash in the counter. Like, there's all kinds of moves you can put here, but when I was running the damage calculations, I was just, like, thinking on the coverage. I didn't really see too much of a point, whereas counter, I feel, bails you out and catches the opponent off guard more than anything. Like, if you go and just truck them on a waterfall, they might go, whoa, is that a Swampert banded? Okay, I gotta keep an eye on that. And then Swampert comes in later and then uses counter. It's like, what? How is that even a possibility? Well, now you're dead. So we got that going on, and since we don't have to worry about speed, 2v2 hit points, 2v2 attack, 4 speed for the creep. And then, there we go. 60 creep is a thing. I don't know, maybe give up a bit more to get a bit more, and then game's funny and weird like that. Yeah, all of this stuff just coming together means that, like, Swampert is one of the strongest banded attackers because it's giga bulky, and it will start one-shotting things. How hard is a one-shot? Let's find out. So, we have a Weavile, which is a 70 hit point, 65 defense Pokemon. Weavile doesn't do anything to us on max hit points, and then we one-shot it on Earthquake with Choice Band, Adamant, and no other shenanigans going on. And if we're in, like, Torrent range, Waterfall also gets really nasty. So yeah, we eat a hit. Knockoff or Icicle Crash isn't putting us into Torrent, but it kind of like shows some weirdness. You know, this is a Life Orb Weavile using its strongest stab move to get 50-ish%. So anything weaker than that, we're a 3-hit KO Pokemon, which means we're going to be picking up 1+, if not 2. It kind of gets nasty. And then it also depends on the meta. Maybe if Pokemon are like kind of slower and bulkier, Swampert at least gets some tag damage before it goes down. Like that Waterfall is going to wreck a Bronzong or something. So game's still kind of weird. And we can also play around with numbers. 85-80 is still going to be a chance to KO on the Earthquake. Like, look at that. If a Pokemon is not a dedicated tank, it risks getting one-shot by the choice banded Swampert. Or it will just straight up get one shot. If it hits Swampert really hard, Swampert bulks it out and then returns the KO. So that's what means, like, oh, when you look at the damage numbers and compare it to Garchomp, this Pokemon's kind of weird. Like, you don't think about these numbers, but they exist. And, like, is that what's being slept on? I don't know. I personally like this moveset because being able to ruin your opponent's day